Welcome everyone. The topic for the day is emergency response mechanism. What happens during the cases of exigencies, untoward incidents which you have not planned for it? How will you respond? Now let us understand that. So we talk about first thing is can we plan the emergencies? Now we can always plan in the sense what happens if. So we do not plan when it happens, but we can always plan what happens. So if this is what we can do around and this particular uh, scenarios, let us understand the planning process. Planning, remember, is crucial component for any and every health and safety program. This needs to be incorporated in form of every emergency action. Remember, even in hospitals, multi-specialty hospital, normal hospital, there is one live department which is very much under stress. Is the emergency department. They they have incorporated this emergency things wherein any a type of patient might actually arrive, and it can be a heart attack patient, it can be a road accident patient, it can be people who've just suffered a stroke or lost consciousness, anything and everything that needs to be mitigated as on in the first hand for first aid kind of benefit. We need to plan, process, or have procedure in place altogether for emergency action. Remember, planning is prevention and preparedness. These are the vital component of planning. A comprehensive emergency response program would cover not only on-site incidents but also off-site incidents. What I am very been clearing about your programs of your factories, of your companies, of your corporate bodies, the organization within the premises and off premises. Remember, the of if any cases there are any untoward incidents, so how do you, what will happen, where will you transport, how, what, and where will you transport? This is what we are talking around it. So important element in this program are overall procedures, resources allocations, plans to execute the uh, preparedness. The emergency action plan should address emergencies that the employer may reasonably expect in a work. So we'll talk about the planning responses. Now, this is what we are talking about. Within an on-site incident, what happens with ERP threats, property threats? There is a industry which we are talking about it, which comprises of the community. Yes, definitely, yes, there is property exigencies, there might be a threat onto the life, probably there might be discrepancies in the product, there might be pollutions in the environment that looks around it, and in effect it threatens the life, the environment, the property. See, this is what we are looking at it. So what does it do? So how do we manage threat with an emergency response program or talking about it? So remember, the emergency things which can be planned for are the equipments and the personnel. We can have fire departments around it. We have the emergency response team members prepared for it, or should we say disaster management teams? We have to have the paramedics, the doctors on board. We have to have the first aid responders, the management, and so on. Absolutely so on with the police, the district management, things that needs to be taken care of. We have the equipment. Please understand. Are we well equipped? Are there fire extinguisher available? What are the contamination plans that comes around it? The ambulances availability thereof, the treatment route, the isolation center, the hospital, the medication. But this will be part of your ERP, and this time ERP is emergency response program. Mind you, for this particular video, every time I utter ERP, it is emergency response program. So what is this program? This is program basically amalgamation or planning of equipment and personals. How do we make a balance for an emergency procedure? So remember, policies and procedures can be developed to consider what the hazards at the site, the worst case scenario, the eventualities, as in the D-Day that comes around it, the existing guidelines or standards or the legal compliance that we have been following it or not, the knowledge of the company operation background as well as the internal resources availability, finances, such is the requirement which we talk about it. We need to understand this thing time and again. Then we have the information of an external source, such as the distance from the fire brigade, their management capability, their execution capability, what is the distance between your the on-site where the things have happened and the medical facilities that has been there, what kind of services can be expected at the medical service center, and what happened in cases of number of casualty being on a higher end, how do we mitigate such kind of responses. So let us understand the steps of ERP or emergency planning. Number one step that comes around it, which needs to understand altogether. Steps for ERP would be health and safety committee. Having one in place is of the first priority. Establish a team to coordinate an emergency team, as in a disaster management, as in any exigencies that might arise around it. And existing health and safety committees can take on this responsibility. The committee may also want to consider including outside organization, the local emergency planning committee, definitely yes, the local thing that comes around it, the emergency medical services that we go around it, the fire disaster management specialist that comes around. So these needs to be understood. Is the local government that comes can come up to help the local medical facility that can be mooted around or moved around, and the fire disaster management team that can be at the shortest span of time. We come to the next step is to update as to implement the emergency response plans altogether. An emergency response plan gives vivid descriptions as to what will happen in case of certain outcomes that we look into it. It is we are here to define who and what. Who was the responsible? Can we identify this person? And what is the steps that needs to be taken in a particular situation? A chain of command has to be established. We have to have a proper chain of command. Writing the plan begins with assessing what measures are already there in place, and probably in cases of eventualities how we are going to focus. Let us move to the next step. Check availability of resources in terms to understand the strength, the weaknesses of the organization, company, facility, whatever you may say. So what are the internal resources? First and the foremost thing is the CPR supplies or the first aid supplies or the trained personnel. Are people available with the CPR training altogether? If they in cases of fire, are there fire extinguisher, are there fire equipment, are there fire prevention exigencies available at the centers, at the facility. We talk about the heavy equipment availability on the types. We will be talking around everything. We'll talk about the availability of the shelters, ability to shelters in place. The transportation equipment is very important. How do we transport it in case the casualty is in multiple numbers on a higher end? In-house emergency response teams is what we are talking around it. Sprinkler alarm systems and the security systems of the personal body. Yes, very true. This are all comprising of the internal bodies of the facility of the organization. Now let us understand that everything cannot be built in within an organization. At the end of the day, organization is there for a separate operation. There for an existence for a separate operation, and not only to mitigate disasters, but then that is what the organization would be coughing off taxes for. Therein where the local government is to chip in. The chip in what the external things comes around it. The local government might be giving it the fire department, the police department, the emergency medical services, and the ERT, the emergency medical teams, in terms of hazmat or hazardous material response team that we talk around it. So this is where the government can actually play in. The local government, the local media can actually play in terms of fire, police, medical, and the hazardous material response team is concerned. So understand. Let us understand what the research can be done on the facility. Review the existence altogether. We'll talk about the alarms and the fire suppression systems. Are there? Is it available? Is it required? If required, if the alarms are there and it is still ringing, but the um, volume of the audio is very, very shrill. Now, this doesn't serve the purpose altogether. So, we need to understand what is being present and how effective are they are all about it. So, building diagrams and plans, pasting it them on every boards, every notice board, every wall, role of the key personnel, evacuation route needs to be mentioned around it, the housekeeping practices, about a list of hazmat or hazardous material which is being present on the site needs to be informed, and then the material safety data sheets what we are looking into it. So walk through the facility to see what preparation have actually been done, put in place, any differences between what is written documents and what is actually occurring in the workplace should be known every now and then. So step number 3, let us understand the step number 3. What this is very important, and in terms of training part of it, in terms of sensitizing is all about it. We need to tell or onboard every employees for the emergency action plan, including the evacuation plan, the alarm system, the reporting procedures of the personnel, and the shutdown procedures of the equipment, and the potential emergencies. So what training we require? We require when a new equipment, new material, new processes have been introduced, everyone should be incorporated a training to how to use or handle such kind of equipment, material, or processes for that matter. When layout changes, when design of the facility changes, we need to make them understand why this change has been incorporated, what facilitates, and in cases of exigencies, how do we mitigate such kinds of things. When procedures have been updated or revised, when exercises show that employee performances is inadequate, then we need to have training. If there are any lessons to be learned from accident, it is all about sensitizing, having the available knowledge to each and every employee. Talking about the minimum training should be given to overall, given about the overview of the emergency action plan, review of the evacuation procedures, the routes for every section of the workplace. We should always have this practice drill for emergency evacuation and the first aid thing. Then the drill should be happening for emergency evacuation on a random basis, and if possible at a regular basis, actually on an annual basis. Probably include police and fire department authorities also. The drills will lessen the confusion, will understand, make them prepared for any eventualities, all the employees that are talking around it. The drill should reflect the action taken by different types of emergencies: fire, tornado, earthquake, depending upon the vulnerability and comes around it. Let us come to the step number 4. We talk about the physical and psychological impact. What is it about? We will talk about the financial and the support system and the workplace operation. Physical and psychological impact. The plan must be facilitated. What needs to be done? The plan needs to be done accordingly um, for all people who are injured then and there to receive at least sufficient medical care. It can include physical rehabilitation. It might actually include psychological rehabilitation in terms of counseling and so on and so forth. Then we talk about financial support. The plan should have certain benefits that should be brought in or been invoked at times of emergency for the benefit of the health and care of the employees. The compensation, the workers can be suitably compensated, and the social service that can provide definite amount of food, shelters, and other requirement for a particular period of time till things goes back to normal. So federal aid, if the area is declared national disaster area, federal aid is a government aid that we are looking at it. Let us understand, despite any untoward accident happens, nobody wants to have it, even in a private organization. So everybody should chip in all together. So workplace operations, definitely yes. Process for recovery so that the operations can continue as more often than not. We will be talking about it. Contingency plans should be developed for having backup system to protect the document, computer files, and areas. Let us come to the next steps, or the step number 5 is to modify the plan. Please understand, we need to understand, we need to plan it and change it from time to time. Not every plan can be made permanent. Things have been changed, processes have been introduced, and new materials might be utilized, introduced, new equipment might be brought in place. We have to have those practice drills as often as possible. This is what we are looking into it. We need to understand, jot down in cases of emergency whom to contact, who are the key person that needs to be informed probably, and sought confidence or sought help from. Any renovation, any changes in the floor plan must be reviewed as to how they will impact in cases of evacuation, in cases of emergency. One of the best methodology of doing this thing is to do with the periodic drill that comes around it, gives staff to chance a practice what to do in case something actually happens. So let us understand the important elements of emergency response plan. We have the vulnerability assessment. We need to have a chain of command. The team has to be in place. The communication system, the alarm system needs to be there. Suppression system, evacuation planning, emergency medical facilities, everything needs to be at place, at tandem, all together at any point of time. So, important elements. One of these important things is to have a list of hazard, the hazmat, hazardous material present on the premises of any enterprises. Everybody should be knowing about it. Emergency planners needs to determine if or other nearby facilities may pose a hazard altogether. Any toxic material that may cause unsafe condition. So, important source of information, record of past incident, occupational experiences, knowledge of both technological, chemical, or physical, national hazard by consuming with external organizations such as fire department, engineering consultant, and government department that comes around it. So, we were talking about these important elements that needs to be done. We need to have a record, the history, the occupational experiences, and knowledge of both technological and natural hazards that come. Next is the chain of command. The employer should design an emergency response coordinator, back up those coordinator with requisite responsibilities, equip them with the required responses and duties made available to them. The coordination should be drawn from managerial ranks, possibly the engineering manager, possibly the safety manager, the environmental compliance manager. So, employees should know who the designated coordinators are in case of requirement, uh, in case of there are any untoward accident. Please, everybody should know whom to get in touch with. So, duties of the coordinators and the employees includes determining what emergencies may occur. This is what needs to be understood. Pre-plan everything if possible. Can we have a pilot study, or can we have a simulation already in place? Direct all emergency activities including the evacuation of employees. That is what of the most important thing that comes around it. Ensuring outside emergency services are notified as and when on required. Remember, what are the outside emergency service? This is police, this is fire, this is medical teams, and this is the hazmat, or should I say the disaster management group that we have spoken around it. Again, police, fire, medical responses, and the hazmat or the disaster management team that we are looking into it. And if possible, directing how to shut down the operation of the plant, the factory, the facility, or the thereby. So we'll talk about the emergency response team are the first line defense of emergency. These people, these group of people would be the first people to react positively to mitigate these emergencies. ERT should be thoroughly trained for potential crisis, physically capable of carrying out their duties. Team members needs to know about the toxic hazard at the workplace and will be able to judge when to evacuate and how much to do about it, when to rely on an outside help and how to go about it. So, team must be trained in first aid, definitely yes. Use of various types of fire extinguishers. If there are any pathogen risks in terms of blood, probably mitigate them. Take proper precaution. The chemical spill procedure, the search and emergency rescue procedure, the hazardous material response team that we around it. Next is the important element in situation requiring evacuation. The first step is to let the occupant know they must. This is what I'm trying to tell. They must vacate the building. Describe the worker alarm system. Occupants must know what kind of alarm has been meant around it. In case if you hear the alarms, please vacate the building, vacate the premises. Do not use elevators. Go manually and things like that. Alarm must be both seen and heard. There must be absolutely, it should be stimulating all your senses as possible as going around it. Around it. Suppressant systems are designed to put out fires. Definitely, yes, absolutely. It might remove either of the fuel or of the oxygen or the ignition point or the combustion material that comes around it. There are many types of suppressant system, and believe me or not, not everything suits to all the conditions. Every of the suppressant system suits all the conditions. Most common are automatic water-based sprinkler that comes around it in a building. Probably there are many kinds. But I also believe that dry chemical carbon dioxide system also works because of an electrical fire. Water based sprinkler system doesn't mitigate the emergency. They may be connected to a detention and alarm system, definitely yes, maybe separate also. The system might be inspected, tested on an annual basis to ensure when and who will work. So let us stress upon the evacuation planning. At the time of emergency, the employee should know what type of evacuation is necessary and what exactly should be their roles. Partial, complete evacuation, whom to go look into it. We are talking about the goals of the evacuated people: move resources, move equipment, move essential supplies, essential inventories, essential equipment out of the threatening places, essential documents, the designation of the refugee or the safe areas for evacuation. Now, what are these refuge areas? Are the areas which are supposedly have been designed to put all kind of emergencies at bay. Now, should establish a method of warning employees? Definitely yes. Map indicates the evacuation routes for building and facilities sites. So we'll talk about the evacuation planning. The first and foremost thing, enough escape exits should be there for escape routes. They should not be blocked and they should be clearly demarcated. The routes must be wide enough so that people can actually accommodate a number of occupants. If required, certain equipments and certain documents need to be going around it, and it should lead through a public thoroughfare, not to a closed area, not to a courtyard. Escape route do not lead to any area that might be considered as a dangerous for the evacuees, assuring that all personnel know that the evacuation route, probably the routine also, the check-in procedure for both the areas and site evacuation. Organization head counts to ensure all facility occupants should be exited. Establish a system for identifying any person who has not been evacuated or are missing in action or we'll talk about the rescue emergency medical facilities. The employer should find out what medical facilities are closest to them. This is what we have been trying to tell it to you. What are the fire department that is closest to them? The committee should look at the workload of make sure that these are accessible to the emergency services. Remember, there are three kind of things that comes to be very important as far as the medical emergencies are concerned. They are what? They are employers in a remote area, in a high security situation, and with a high hazard operation. What are those things that needs to be taken care? People in remote areas, people in a high security situation, and in a high hazardous material. So we need to have a definitive plan as to do what kind of responses we are going to go around it, what kind of help that we can expect from the outside responses, and thereby in coordination help to contain the emergencies as much as possible. This I come to an end of this video presentation. Thank you for watching this video.